Hey everyone, Nigel and Luke here, and welcome to Crime Zone. Well, as hard as it is to believe, we're already halfway through 2024, and if you've been tuning into the channel for a while now, you probably know that that can only mean one thing. It's time for another edition of Dumbest International Criminals, our quarterly recurring series where we take a look at some of the dumbest criminals and world crime stories that we've covered so far in a given year on Crimes of the Week International. One thing to keep in mind is that these segments have not been edited since they appeared in their respective lists, so minor details and things like specific charges may have been updated since we first covered them. Also, if you like these videos, be sure to let us know in the comments section below. With that out of the way, let's get into it. Authorities in the Thai province of Pathum, Thani say that a 30-year-old woman was arrested last week after she foolishly tried to fake her own kidnapping as part of a harebrained scheme to pay off gambling debts. The whole thing started on April 3rd when a 51-year-old woman named Noi showed up at a police station in Muang Nantaburi district. The frantic woman explained that her 30-year-old daughter, Krate, was in danger. Noi's husband had received photos and videos of her tied up with her mouth covered. This was followed by messages stating that criminals had abducted her and would only release her once they paid a ransom of 100,000 baht, or about $2,700 US. It also threatened that Krete would be killed if her mother or father went to the police. Despite this, Noi had decided to take her chances, which turned out to be a good decision. When police tracked the cell phone that sent the ransom messages, they were led to a hotel in the neighboring province of Pathum Thani. Upon raiding a room there, they found Krete, who was alone and in no apparent danger. During questioning, the 30-year-old admitted that she had made the whole kidnapping thing up as part of a scheme to get money from her parents. She explained that she needed the cash to pay off large online gambling debts that she had racked up. As if this weren't bad enough, it turned out that this wasn't even the first time Krete had faked a kidnapping. Her mother told police about an earlier situation like this before, though said that she never believed her daughter would try to do this a second time. Krete was arrested following her confession. However, at the time of this recording, no formal charges against her have been announced. Authorities in Brazil say that a woman has been arrested and is potentially facing a number of charges this week following a ridiculous and brazen incident in which she wheeled a dead man into a bank as part of an alleged scheme to fraudulently obtain money from a loan. According to reports, the whole thing started sometime on April 16th when the suspect, Erica de Souza Vieira Nunes, walked into a bank in the Rio de Janeiro neighborhood of Bangu. At the time, she was pushing a man in a wheelchair, later identified as 68-year-old Paulo Roberto Braga. Nunes said that Paulo was her uncle and that she was his caretaker, and that they were there to complete some paperwork regarding a recent loan that he had applied for. The loan was for 17,000 Brazilian real, or about $3,200 US. However, after sitting down to sign the paperwork, bank employees quickly realized that something wasn't right. It wasn't that hard to tell from the sounds of it. Paulo was extremely pale and unresponsive, and Nunes was holding up his drooping head with her hand. In case you hadn't guessed it already, Paulo was dead. Though the plot may have been pulled straight from the script of Weekend at Bernie's, the whole thing was understandably a lot less funny in real life. Bank employees watched in horror and began to film what they could as evidence as Nunes tried to force a pen into the dead man's hands so that she could have him pretend to sign the paperwork. While other staff members called the police and waited for officers to arrive, Nunes allegedly attempted to keep up the macabre charade. She talked to Paulo as if he was alive, at one point saying, quote, "Uncle, are you listening? You have to sign it. I can't sign it for you." When one of the employees involved in the situation questioned Nunes about Paulo's condition, remarking that he looked sick, she replied, quote, "He's like that. He doesn't say anything." Police eventually did make it to the bank, where Nunes was placed under arrest. It was later determined that Paulo had likely been dead for at least a few hours before being brought to the bank. At the time of this recording, authorities say that they are still investigating the whole situation and are trying to determine if others were involved. They were also looking into the circumstances surrounding how the bank loan was initially applied for and whether Paulo and Nunes are even related. Nunes currently remains in custody and is expected to soon face a number of charges, including theft through fraud, embezzlement, and abuse of a corpse. People across Thailand are outraged and are calling for authorities to conduct an investigation this week after video footage recently emerged online of a foreign tourist appearing to desecrate a popular shrine in a pretty stomach-churning way. Apparently, the whole thing started sometime on April 11th in Bangkok's Klong Toei district. While local residents were trying to enjoy a day at the local Soi Nana shopping area, they were instead treated to a disgusting eyeful. More specifically, they watched in horror as a rather plump tourist pulled down his pants and defecated at the side of the road, right outside a well-known Buddhist temple. Not simply content with this rather gross display, the man then went onto the grounds of the temple itself, where he proceeded to strip naked. He then began washing himself off in one of the temple's fountains. At one point, he was hosed off by a security guard at the facility, who I can only imagine was just trying to get this man to go on his way. I'm honestly not trying to be disrespectful here, but the photos of this have all the energy of a zookeeper hosing down an elephant. Unsurprisingly, when this footage was shared, it quickly went viral on Thai social media. And let's just say, many people weren't super happy to see one of their holy sites being sullied by a fat Westerner who had just shit himself in public. Some went as far as to say that the police should get involved. While it's unclear if authorities have any plans to look into the situation, the incident is unfortunately part of a growing trend of tourists behaving poorly in the country. At the time of this recording, the man's name has not been released. A 47-year-old Japanese man was reportedly foiled by his own good manners this week after he allegedly attempted to carry out a robbery at a convenience store, only to bizarrely call back afterwards to apologize. According to reports, the whole thing started at around 7:40 p.m. on April 15th, when the suspect, later identified as 47-year-old Nobuyuki Nagata, walked into a 7-Eleven location in the town of Komono, in Mie Prefecture. Rather than grabbing any items, the 47-year-old instead headed directly for the counter where a 55-year-old female employee was behind the register. Once there, Nagata allegedly pulled out a bottle of cleaning solution, then started spraying the woman and screaming, "I'll kill you! Give me the money!" While this was likely pretty terrifying for the employee, as you might imagine, the spray bottle wasn't all that effective of a weapon. As a result, Nagata apparently fled the store empty-handed pretty quickly. The situation got even stranger a few minutes later when the employee received a phone call at the store. She picked up only to hear the same man who had just tried to rob her on the other end. He said, "Sorry about what I just did," before hanging up. When police arrived at the scene, they called this number back. Nagata apparently answered, told officers where he was, and then waited for them to arrest him. While the 47-year-old admitted during questioning that he threatened to kill the 7-Eleven employee, strangely, he claimed that he never actually wanted any money. It's unclear if this was an attempt to get out of a robbery charge, though at minimum it appears Nagata will now be facing assault charges. Representatives from England's Manchester Crown Court say that a woman has been spared jail time this week, several months after an unhinged attack against a fellow bar patron after he guessed her age wrong during what he thought was a playful exchange. According to reports, the whole thing unfolded sometime on September 9th, 2023, when the victim, Carl Cooper, was with his friend Stuart in the beer garden of the Unicorn pub in the city of Manchester. While there, the pair struck up a conversation with Joanne Dodd and her sister, who were also enjoying some drinks. Joanne, in particular, was enjoying quite a few drinks, but we'll get to that in a second. At some point, the four were apparently joking around when the subject of the conversation turned to age. Joanne challenged Carl to guess her age, to which he replied 43. This apparently set Joanne off, who is in fact 39. So much so that she almost immediately flew into a rage. Sensing that the situation was getting pretty heated, Carl tried to de-escalate things by going to the bathroom to get away from Joanne. However, when he came back out, she spotted him, and before he could react, she charged at him, striking him twice in the face with her wine glass. The attack narrowly missed one of Carl's eyes and left him with a 4-inch gash to the face that required stitches. Joanne fled the scene, but was arrested a short time later. Joanne fled the scene, but was arrested a short time later. The 43-year-old ultimately pleaded guilty to inflicting grievous bodily harm, though this week was spared jail time. Joanne's lawyer argued that she was suffering from low self-esteem when the crime took place, was extremely intoxicated, and was sorry for what she had done. Despite facing a possible 3-year sentence, the judge instead handed Joanne a 1-year sentence which was suspended for 12 months, citing the fact that she had no prior convictions and seemed like a, quote, hard-working woman and loving mother who posed no risk to the public. In addition to this, the 43-year-old will have to complete 180 hours of unpaid work and pay £800 in compensation, or roughly $1,000 US, to her victim. After researching and writing about crime stories for several years now, I like to think that few things in this arena surprise me anymore. However, I gotta hand it to the guy in this next story. He is a living reminder that just when you think you've heard and seen it all, the universe has a way of one-upping itself in the ridiculousness department. A video clip went viral across Thai social media this week after a police officer posted an amusing interaction between him and a suspect, one in which the man can be seen offering a rather novel excuse for his drug use. The whole thing apparently took place recently when the unidentified suspect was arrested for possession and use of methamphetamine. While this on its own obviously wasn't that out of the ordinary, things took a hilarious and unexpected turn when police began talking to the man on their way back to the station. During the car ride, the man revealed what he said was the real reason he was buying and using meth. He claimed that he was doing it to, quote, protect the youth. Specifically, he said that he was only using meth so that teens would have less access to it. He claimed that he didn't even like the drug, though the actual video interaction between the unidentified man and the officers is in Thai. Thankfully, local news sources provided a rough English translation of the conversation. The officer behind the camera asked the man if meth is expensive, to which the man replies, quote, no, not at all. Very cheap. Too cheap. The officer then asks, well, if you don't like it then, why buy it? To which the man says, quote, without me, teenagers would have easy access. When the clip of the interaction was posted online, many understandably responded with jokes. One commenter wrote, quote, what a good man! Such a great sacrifice for the younger generation. Another chimed in that the man should be given a position with the public health authority. Even a news report we came across sarcastically pondered whether the man's, quote, heroic act would contribute to a reduction in his sentence. At the time of this recording, the man's identity has not been released. It's therefore unclear what charges he is currently facing. A middle-aged Japanese government worker recently found himself on the receiving end of both professional and legal consequences, following a bizarre incident in which he allegedly flew into a rage at his office and attacked a fellow employee because he spoiled a plot point in a popular graphic novel series. The whole thing took place earlier this year at the Uji branch of the Kyoto District Legal Affairs Bureau. The government office is usually responsible for handling legal paperwork for things like real estate transactions and the filing of new business documents. However, on February 1st, the bureau played host to some decidedly unlawful conduct, when one of its managers allegedly went full beast mode on a subordinate. According to reports, the problems began when the junior employee, identified only as a man in his 20s, was discussing some of the latest plot points about the popular manga series Oshinoko. For those unfamiliar, manga are a form of comics or graphic novels featuring uniquely Japanese art styles. Anyway, the junior employee was in the middle of talking about this with others when a manager at the office, identified only as a man in his 50s, overheard. He hadn't yet read the latest chapters of Oshinoko, and was apparently so angry about the spoilers that he flew into a rage, one that ended with him grabbing his subordinate by the chest and kicking him in the torso. Although the younger employee wasn't really injured, the manager's behavior was still unhinged enough that it was understandably reported to both higher-ups at the office and the police. The 50-something-year-old was apparently transferred after this and is currently facing assault charges. At the time of this recording, the case still has yet to go to court. A 54-year-old British woman has been sentenced this week, just over a year after she allegedly attacked her husband with a knife, a crime that took place after he fell asleep during the middle of a conversation and she flew into a rage. According to reports, the incident took place one night back in April of last year, after husband and wife Barry and Deborah Stollard returned to their home in the village of Dymchurch following a night out at a local pub. The couple of 21 years were sitting and relaxing together when Deborah started talking about some issues that she was experiencing in her personal life. She had only gotten part of the way into her story, though, when she looked over and discovered that Barry had fallen asleep. Though it's easy to see how Deborah might have felt slighted by this, she apparently skipped annoyed and went straight to unhinged. After throwing several items at her husband, she reportedly grabbed a knife and stabbed him in the chest. Barry ended up requiring emergency medical treatment, though thankfully there was no damage to his lungs or other organs and he made a full recovery. Deborah, meanwhile, was arrested and charged with wounding with intent and criminal damage. She was also prohibited from living with Barry afterwards to ensure his safety. This week, the 54-year-old pleaded guilty to the lesser charge of unlawful wounding, though claimed that the situation wasn't entirely her fault. Her reason? She was going through menopause at the time of the stabbing. In a statement to the court, her lawyer said in part, quote, "It was, in my submission, the menopause and the hormonal effect that created that was the main cause of this event." In fairness to Deborah, it appears that Barry agrees with this explanation. In his own statement to the court this week, he asked the judge to spare his wife jail time, saying, quote, "The incident was a one-off. It was created by the two of us drinking alcohol and my wife suffering with the menopause." He also went on to state that the court-ordered bail restrictions imposed on Deborah that required them to live apart had actually made their lives more difficult, saying, quote, "There is no reason for this to continue. I request that my wife is not given a prison sentence and that we can live together as a happily married couple again." While the judge appeared sympathetic to Barry's statement, Deborah also had a previous conviction for assault occasioning actual bodily harm. Partly for this reason, she was given a 9-month jail sentence, though it was suspended for 2 years. In addition, Deborah was given 12 months of probation, ordered to complete 100 hours of community service, and must take part in 20 rehabilitation activity requirement sessions. Authorities in Thailand's Chiang Rai province say that they are investigating quite the strange theft case this week, after a man was caught on surveillance video stealing a bunch of underwear while he himself was wearing very little clothing. According to reports, the bizarre incident took place at around 6 a.m. on May 8th, when a 44-year-old man named Sompap was at his home in Muang Chiang Rai district. He was just about to make breakfast when he heard what sounded like a car pulling up outside. Because of a foot injury, Sompap wasn't able to get to his front door right away. By the time he made it outside, the car was gone. As it turned out, so were 8 pairs of his underwear that he had left out there to dry. Since Sompap had a surveillance camera that recorded the exterior of his property, he decided to go and have a look at what it had captured. When he reviewed the footage, he was pretty surprised by what he found. His underwear had been stolen by an unknown man who was also only dressed in underwear at the time. Annoyed and likely very confused, Sompap posted the footage to Facebook asking if anyone in the area knew this man. It wasn't long before the perpetrator reached out himself to confess. While the man's name wasn't released in any of the reports we came across, apparently the man claimed that the whole thing had been a dare. His friend who was with him in the car had dared him to steal the underwear, and for some reason he decided to do it. Following this admission, the man agreed to meet Sompap at a local police station to discuss things further. He also apparently offered to give the underwear back, though Sompap said that he would prefer to just buy new ones, which, is pretty understandable, I think. Anyway, at the time of this recording, it's unclear what, if any, charges the underwear thief will be facing. Authorities in Japan's Kanagawa Prefecture say that a 55-year-old woman was arrested last week, several months after she allegedly made a staggering number of nuisance calls to her local police department. According to reports, the whole thing started on December 20th of 2023, when the phones of the Kanagawa police started ringing off the hook. The caller was a 55-year-old woman who usually proceeded to say one of two things. Quote, "Why are you even here?" Or alternatively, the more festive, quote, "Merry Christmas. Die." As you might imagine, any nuisance call situation like this is irritating for police. For starters, they have better things to do with their time, and it's a drain on their resources. However, this woman was particularly relentless. Apparently, between December 20th and 27th, she called a whopping 1,200 times. Yeah. Instead of the 12 days of Christmas, it was more like the 8 days of nonstop harassment. Now at this point, you're probably wondering two things. First of all, where did the woman find the time to make all those calls? Second, why did police wait so long to do anything about it? Unfortunately, we don't really have any solid answers on that first question. In particular, I'd like to know if she was eating and sleeping at all during that time. But hey, I guess pure spite can get you through a lot of things. As for the second question, apparently it has to do with how investigations like this usually shake out. Once Japanese police make an arrest, they only have 23 days to build a case, after which they have to submit it to a prosecutor. The thing is, unless they can also specifically prove that the person acted with malice rather than it resulting from something like a mental health issue, prosecutors normally throw out the cases more than half the time as long as the culprit shows remorse or promises to pay compensation. That means that unless it becomes a pretty big problem, most of the time it's not worth it for police to do an investigation in the first place. Well, apparently 1,200 phone calls was enough to show intent, because on May 15th, police arrested the 55-year-old at her home. She is now being held on suspicion of obstructing police business. Authorities in the Belgian city of Antwerp say that a disgraced entrepreneur is in trouble with the law once again this week, after he was allegedly caught violating the terms of his house arrest following a harebrained scheme that involved attaching his court-ordered ankle monitor to his dog. According to reports, 35-year-old Ladislas Leys was once a big name in Belgium's food and nightlife space. After opening a series of ambitious luxury restaurants in some of the country's biggest cities that were known for their innovative concepts, the entrepreneur generated a lot of media attention around himself beginning around 2017. However, when the buzz died down, so did the cash that Leys was bringing in. The situation led to a series of contentious bankruptcy proceedings in which the 35-year-old repeatedly defrauded his creditors. While he was ultimately convicted of charges related to this and ordered to repay nearly 300,000 euros, that wasn't the end of the implosion of his reputation. Near the end of 2023, he was also convicted of sexually assaulting a 19-year-old student. He was sentenced to 4 years in prison for this, though most of the sentence was suspended and he was allowed to serve his time under house arrest. It seems that the slap on the wrist only confirmed in Leys' mind that he was above the law, because a couple of weeks ago he apparently pushed his luck even further. According to police, despite being under house arrest, the 35-year-old decided to attend a 3-day dance festival in the province of Limburg called Extrema Outdoor, in order to trick police into thinking that he was still at home. Before leaving for the festival earlier this month, he allegedly cut off his ankle monitor and attached it to his British bulldog. Of course, police were not fooled. The monitor alerted them to suspicious activity, and it was discovered that Leys was not home when police went to check on him at his residence. Even if the plan with the ankle monitor had somehow worked, though, it's likely that the 35-year-old's brazen activity on social media would have given everything away. Apparently, he was posting stories of himself at the festival to his Instagram page regularly while he was there. Realizing at some point that he was busted, Leys turned himself into police on May 20th, presumably after the festival was over. At the time of this recording, the 35-year-old is still in custody, though it remains to be seen whether he will now be forced to serve the rest of his sentence in prison or whether he will be granted house arrest once again. A 37-year-old Singaporean man has reportedly been charged and is looking at some serious prison time this week, following a ridiculous scheme in which he attempted to frame his wife on a drug possession offense. The whole thing apparently began at around 5:40 a.m. on October 17, 2023, when the suspect, 37-year-old Tan Xiang Long, allegedly broke into his wife's car, which was inside of a multi-level parking garage in the city-state's Punggol residential area. Once inside, he pulled out more than 216 grams of marijuana, which he proceeded to leave in the vehicle before taking off. While it's unclear what Tan had against his wife, the intent behind his actions was clear. He was apparently trying to make it so that police would think that she was selling drugs. Unfortunately for Tan, his plan almost immediately backfired. Police haven't said exactly how it all unraveled, but if we had to guess, we'd say there were probably cameras in the parking garage. In any case, it quickly became clear that the 37-year-old was trying to frame his wife, and instead, he ended up being arrested. This week, Tan was charged with 2 crimes: fabricating false evidence with intent to procure conviction of an offense, and possessing controlled drugs. While the whole story is pretty amusing because of how stupid Tan's scheme was, it's worth remembering that this is Singapore, where drug crimes are punished incredibly harshly. Thankfully, police investigated the situation properly, as it's now Tan who is facing up to 10 years in prison and the equivalent of a $15,000 fine, and not his innocent wife. Representatives from the police service of Northern Ireland say that a couple of their officers were left speechless this week after they drove home an intoxicated woman, only to discover minutes later that she had gotten behind the wheel almost immediately afterwards and caused a crash. The whole thing began sometime in the early morning hours of June 2nd, when the PSNI officers in question were on patrol in the town of Portadown. They were driving along when they spotted a woman who was clearly drunk and walking alone. Concerned for her safety, they offered her a ride home, making sure that she got into her house before heading back out. It seemed like a job well done until about 15 minutes later, when the officers were called about a vehicle collision in the same area. When they arrived at the scene, they were stunned to find the same woman that they had just dropped off slumped over the wheel of a white BMW. Evidently, after being dropped at home, the woman had decided to go out for a late-night drive and had almost immediately slammed into another car. The woman, who has not been identified by name at the time of this recording, was given a breathalyzer test where she unsurprisingly blew over 3 times above the legal limit for alcohol. Thankfully, no one was hurt as a result of the crash, though the woman was arrested and is now awaiting charges. In a post to social media this week, PSNI representatives wrote in part, quote, "We cannot stress the message enough. Never ever drink and drive, or this could be the consequences of your actions. If you ever find yourself in a position where you are considering getting behind the wheel of a car after a few drinks, think about this. Could you live with the guilt if you seriously hurt or kill someone else using the road?" Authorities in the Chinese city of Shanghai say that they were able to solve a burglary case in record time recently, after the alleged culprit made the bizarre choice to leave behind a note at the crime scene that included his contact information. According to reports, the whole thing started sometime on the morning of May 17th, when employees at a building in the city's Pudong New area arrived at work to find that they had been the victims of a crime. Someone had broken into their offices and some equipment as well as other items was clearly missing. When police were called to the scene, things quickly took a strange turn when they found a notebook that didn't belong to any of the workers. It had been left on a desk with several computers stacked on top of it. Upon looking in the notebook, officers were met with quite the surprise. Inside was a message that had been left behind by the perpetrator. It read in part, quote, "Hello, boss. You need to improve your security." The culprit had gone on to write that they had stolen a watch, a computer, and other valuables. However, they claimed that they only really wanted cash and were willing to give the items back for the right price. At the bottom of the letter was a number to call in case the victims were interested. Apparently, the burglar really didn't think this through, though, because it seems he used his actual number, not a burner phone. Using this, as well as surveillance footage from the crime scene that allegedly showed the suspect scaling a wall on the property, police were able to identify him as a man by the last name of Sang. Sang was arrested that same day by 2:30 p.m. All of the stolen items were recovered, and Sang now remains in custody on suspicion of theft. Authorities in Thailand say that more than 16 years on the run recently came to an end for a foolhardy fugitive after he posted a message on social media mocking police and daring them to find him. The case began all the way back on April 10, 2008, when the suspect, identified only by the name Wudachai, got into an argument with another customer while hanging out at a bar on the island of Phuket. That argument quickly escalated, ending with Wudachai allegedly stabbing the other man before fleeing the scene. Thankfully, the victim survived his injuries and was able to give police a bunch of information leading to Wudachai's identification. An arrest warrant was issued for him nearly 2 weeks later. However, by that point, he had gone on the run. For over 16 years, Wudachai managed to evade capture, largely by moving around and changing jobs frequently. Of course, it's likely that police also just didn't devote that many resources to catching him, since he wasn't exactly a high-profile criminal. Despite this, Wudachai apparently convinced himself that he was invincible, and that no matter what, authorities would be unable to find him. This unbridled hubris is presumably what caused him to recently post a message to Facebook, taunting police and even giving away details of his location. That message read in part, quote, "Which cop dares to arrest someone like me? I've been wanted since 2007. No cop is brave enough. I'm in Ta Khun. Come if you can." As you might imagine, this was a pretty big miscalculation on Wudachai's part, who was arrested not long after this message was posted. He was taken into custody on June 1st, after police found him working at a fruit purchasing shop. Following his capture, it seems that the now 35-year-old considerably reeled in his bravado. He claimed that the stabbing that he was wanted for was actually self-defense, and that he had been drunk at the time. He also said that his taunting Facebook post was just for show, and that he actually didn't believe that police would come and arrest him. At the time of this recording, Wudachai is awaiting extradition back to Phuket, where he will face formal charges. In order to understand why this last story is so ridiculous, it helps to have a little bit of background context on a certain part of Japanese policing, specifically on what's known as a koban. Koban is often translated into English as police box, but unlike the police boxes that have traditionally existed in the UK, US, or Canada, in Japan, these are more permanent structures. They're kind of like mini police stations that have a couple of rooms with officers permanently stationed there, and are considered the bedrock of Japanese community policing. Essentially, a place where local residents can always go if they need to speak to an officer. Bearing that in mind, it makes the story we're about to share all the more idiotic. Authorities in Japan's Oita Prefecture say that an 18-year-old man has been arrested on suspicion of robbery this week after he tried to hold up a convenience store in broad daylight, one that was located right next to a koban. According to reports, the brazen and foolish crime began sometime after noon on June 1st, when the 18-year-old suspect walked into the convenience store in question, which is located in the city of Beppu. After heading up to the front counter, the teen allegedly pulled a knife on the 58-year-old employee there and screamed, "Give me your money." Of course, given the store's proximity to the police box, the employee refused to hand over anything. Instead, the staff member just calmly walked right next door, told the officers there what was going on, and headed back. Police walked in and immediately arrested the 18-year-old. Apparently, this all happened in front of a bunch of customers who I can only assume were just as confused as the employee. The 18-year-old has not been identified by name and currently remains in custody. Representatives from Spain's national police say that a 26-year-old German tourist has been arrested this week, following an idiotic incident in which he allegedly tried to steal an expensive piece of construction equipment while drunk, only to crash it moments later, injuring himself and seriously damaging the vehicle in the process. The whole thing began sometime on June 9th, when police received calls from the owner of a local quarry on the island of Majorca. The owner explained that they had just been contacted by some of their neighbors who stated that a young German man had come to them suffering from injuries and claiming that he had been messing around down at the active dig site. The owner had gone to check the situation out, where they found their 25-ton wheel loader overturned at the side of one of the quarry roads and partially hanging over into a ravine. When officers arrived at the scene, they were able to speak to the 26-year-old German suspect, who was in the country on vacation. He was apparently drunk, covered in blood from injuries he had sustained, and admitted to sneaking into the quarry. According to police, after climbing the perimeter fence at the site, the man found the keys to the wheel loader and allegedly attempted to drive off with it. However, in his intoxicated state, he had made it less than 80 yards before getting into an accident and flipping the piece of heavy machinery on its side. While the 26-year-old was quickly treated for his injuries, the situation with the wheel loader wasn't so straightforward. The crash apparently did major damage to the vehicle and caused engine oil to leak out all over the road. The owner of the wheel loader went as far as to claim in local news reports that the thing had been entirely destroyed, and that they would likely have to buy a new one due to a lack of available spare parts. The wheel loader is reportedly valued at between 300 and 350,000 euros, or about $325,000 to $380,000 US. As for the German tourist, he has now been arrested on property damage crimes and reportedly remains in custody. Authorities in the Thai capital of Bangkok say that they arrested a suspected drug dealer with a rather bizarre and flawed MO this week, after she was apparently found to be using mute couriers to distribute her illegal products, believing that they wouldn't be able to identify her if they were caught. According to reports, the whole thing started sometime last month, when police in Bangkok's Yanawa district were tipped off about a local drug gang. Witnesses said that the group was pretty unique and identifiable for one specific reason. All of the couriers, the street-level people who actually sold and delivered the drugs, were deaf and mute, meaning they were unable to speak. The alleged leader of the group was a 53-year-old woman named Payun. For some reason, Payun apparently believed that by hiring mute couriers, she was protecting herself, reasoning that if any of them were caught, they wouldn't be able to pass along information about her to police. Of course, as you may have already noticed, there was an obvious flaw in her logic. After launching an investigation, officers from the Investigation Division of the Metropolitan Bureau organized an undercover drug buy from one of Payun's couriers, a man identified as Pathum. After Pathum allegedly sold meth to an officer, he was arrested, at which point he was taken in for questioning. He almost immediately pointed authorities in Payun's direction. You see, while Pathum may have been mute, he wasn't illiterate. He just wrote down the information for police instead of saying it to them. Payun was arrested last week on June 6th. It's unclear why Payun thought that mute people just couldn't communicate at all. In fact, what makes the case even stranger is that apparently she's hard of hearing herself. So you think she would kind of have a tiny bit of insight into her courier's disabilities, to say the very least. Anyway, Payun now claims that she isn't the mastermind behind the drug scheme, and that there are two much more powerful people who actually supply the drugs and forced her and others to sell them. However, so far she has reportedly refused to give up these names, citing fears for her safety. Police say that they are now investigating this new lead, but in the meantime, Payun remains in custody. Authorities on the island nation of Singapore say that a 36-year-old man has been sentenced to jail time this week after he repeatedly ran out on bills from a number of dental clinics by using the same grade school level scheme. According to reports, the man in question, 36-year-old Ryosuke Tanaka, pulled the bizarre stunt no fewer than 7 times at 6 different dental clinics. Each time it went the same way. He would show up at the business and receive their services. However, when it came time to pay, he would ask to use the bathroom. Upon excusing himself, he would immediately run away. I should point out that this wasn't just for run-of-the-mill cleanings either. Tanaka almost exclusively did this with expensive procedures like tooth extractions, x-rays, root canals, and crown treatments. It's no surprise, therefore, that in just these 7 cases alone, he apparently stole the equivalent of over $4,700 in services. These are just the incidents he was charged over, though. Police say that between 2020 and 2022, Tanaka did this to at least 3 other dental clinics, racking up another $2,200 at least in additional unpaid bills. Though Tanaka did plead guilty to multiple charges of cheating this week, it wasn't before he apparently tried to offer some pretty lame excuses for his actions. Perhaps the most ridiculous of these was that he never actually intended to leave the dental clinics without paying, and assumed that he'd be billed through the mail. After he specifically ran out on the bills. Understandably, the court rejected these arguments, as well as a point from the 36-year-old's lawyer who argued that there was no real level of planning or sophistication behind what he did. The judge responded that the crimes might not have been sophisticated, but all of them were clearly premeditated, since Tanaka had asked to go to the bathroom specifically when he was asked for payment. In addition to paying over $7,000 in restitution this week, Tanaka was also sentenced to 5 months in jail. It seems that he got off fairly easy, though, considering that the maximum penalty for his charges was 10 years, as well as a fine. A young Colombian man offered a tearful apology over social media this week, days after a bizarre and viral incident in which he stole a medal that had been awarded to a professional soccer player during the middle of a celebration, while the entire thing was being broadcast on live TV. According to reports, the whole thing began at the end of last week, when the soccer team, Atlético Bucaramanga, won Colombia's Categoria Primera A title. This was apparently a historic achievement for the team, marking the first time they had taken the title in the 75 years since they had been founded. Understandably, as a result, spirits were pretty high in the city of Bucaramanga, with thousands of fans coming out after the final match to take part in a celebration that was held for the team back in their home stadium. As part of that celebration, the club's players were awarded medals by the city's mayor as well as other government officials. It was shortly after this that the wild incident took place. As the players greeted excited fans and gave interviews to the media, one man took advantage of the festivities to seize quite the brazen memento. Apparently realizing that the athletes were distracted, the man ran right up behind central defender Carlos Henao and stole his medal right off his neck. While the man was able to escape given all of the confusion, unfortunately for him, there was something he had overlooked. There were TV cameras everywhere that were broadcasting live, at least one of which captured the theft as it unfolded. When reporters and fans alike realized this, the footage was spread everywhere online, where it quickly went viral. It didn't take long for the thief to be identified as a local young man named Sebastian Luna. While Luna initially tried to claim he'd done nothing wrong, his tune apparently started to change once his name began being publicized everywhere. Soccer isn't exactly known for having the most tolerant or reasonable fans after all, and Luna and his family quickly began to fear violent repercussions. Luna returned the stolen medal and on June 18th offered a tear-filled public apology in a video made by a comedian named Jose Ordóñez. In the video, Luna apologized to many people, organizations, and groups, including the team, his fellow fans, his family, the bar he frequents, his mother, and the entire nation of Colombia. It appears that most people are now taking pity on Luna, as while he was initially arrested, it's been reported that he has since been released and that no charges will be pressed. However, he will be entering a program for alcoholism on the advice of the mayor's office, as he was intoxicated at the time of the offense. Representatives from Australia's Victoria Police say that a man found himself in a Kentucky Fried bucket of trouble last week after he allegedly drove to his local fast food joint while drunk, only to immediately give himself away. According to reports, the whole thing started at around 9 p.m. on June 13th, when police were called by employees at a KFC restaurant in the Melbourne suburb of Doncaster. The workers said that they were pretty sure that one of their customers was driving under the influence and that officers might want to come and check it out. Now you're probably asking yourself, how did they know he was drunk? Well, it wasn't exactly subtle. Upon arriving at the location, the man apparently drove his Honda sedan the wrong way into the drive-thru, then promptly immobilized the vehicle on a curb. Unsurprisingly, when police arrived, the man tested positive for alcohol during a roadside breath test. He was arrested, and officers quickly also discovered that he didn't even have a license to drive. While the man has not been identified by name at the time of this recording, reports state that he is a 42-year-old from the nearby suburb of Templestowe Lower. So far, the man's vehicle has been impounded for 30 days, but he is expected to also face multiple traffic offenses. In a report released by Victoria Police about the incident entitled "Appetite Curbed in Doncaster," authorities took a bit of a joking tone, but nevertheless reminded the public not to drive under the influence. The report read in part, quote, "It took a lot more than a refresher towel to clean up the mess after the driver allegedly tested positive for alcohol during a roadside breath test. Unlike a certain 11 secret herbs and spices, drinking and driving are an original recipe for disaster." Authorities in the English county of Yorkshire say that a bumbling local criminal has been sentenced to prison time this week, months after he violently held up a convenience store, only to foolishly remove his disguise in front of one of the business's security cameras. The whole thing began on the morning of March 5th, 2024, when the owner of N&D Parker, a corner store in the Leeds suburb of Beeston, was busy stocking shelves with one of his assistants. It was about 6:20 a.m., and the pair were hard at work preparing for that day's customers, when suddenly they noticed a man peering through the front window. Seconds later, he, along with another man, burst inside, with the second man waving what appeared to be a handgun. It would turn out to be a fake, however, neither of the victims knew that. Both suspects were wearing black surgical-type masks that were covering most of their faces. After pointing the fake gun at the owner and assistant, the two men demanded all of the cash from the store's register. This was handed over, totaling about £200, as well as around 20 packs of cigarettes. The robbers scooped these into a bag before fleeing the scene. Though the first man involved in the robbery was never identified, it turned out that the second man, the one waving around the fake gun, had made a pretty clumsy mistake during the crime. At some point during the holdup, he removed his face mask right in view of one of the convenience store's surveillance cameras. Using this, police were able to identify him as 40-year-old Stephen Dixon Waterworth. Waterworth was tracked down and arrested not long after. Apparently, he wasn't exactly a smooth criminal to begin with. At the time of his arrest, the 40-year-old already had 47 convictions for 126 different offenses. This week, Waterworth admitted to a charge of robbery and possession of an imitation firearm. He was sentenced to 6 years in prison. Before we wrap up, we'd like to take a second to give a huge shout out to everyone who has made it this far into the video. Seriously, thank you so much for watching. If you found today's upload interesting and informative, we'd be honored if you'd consider liking and subscribing, as well as hitting the notification bell and selecting all notifications to stay up to date with our latest releases. If you're looking for additional ways to help support the channel, we'd love to have you join us over on Patreon. Patrons get ad-free and early access to all of our content, as well as 4 additional stories per week for each of our Crimes of the Week and Crimes of the Week International videos. You can learn more at patreon.com/crimezone, where you'll also find some of the fine folks whose names are currently on screen. All that being said, we understand that not everyone has the means to support financially, and that's totally okay. We appreciate every like, sub, share, and comment that you send our way. Once again, thanks so much everyone, and take care.